Welcome to today's event After Merkel. My name is Florian Eder. I'm a managing editor of Expansion for Politico, and I am your host tonight for this interview, panel discussion, and a wonderful evening. And you're watching Politico Live. We are a very few days after important elections in a big country in Germany, and a lot of things are still very unclear. Who is going to be the next Chancellor? Which coalitions, which parties are going to form a governing coalition, and more questions that are still open and that I would like to discuss tonight. But one thing is sure, that Angela Merkel slowly but surely comes to the end of her 16-year term in high office. That's a new situation, that's an exciting election, and there's a lot to discuss with a fantastic speaker lineup that we have here for you tonight, starting with an interview with the chairman of the EPP group in the European Parliament, Manfred Weber, who is here with me in Brussels in the European Parliament, followed by a panel discussion moderated by my colleague Matthew Kornichnik from our Berlin office, with top German influencers to discuss Germany's leadership in Europe after the Merkel era and analyze the results of Sunday's elections, of course. Also here with me in Brussels in the studio is our poll of polls expert Cornelius Hirsch, who will also provide analysis on how the Germans actually voted. But before we come to that, allow me a few housekeeping remarks. I would like to thank you, of course, first of all, for joining us tonight through one of our 4 platforms. You can watch this event through our event website, on Twitter, on Facebook, and last but not least on LinkedIn. While you do, feel free to get involved with us. You can participate by tweeting about it at Live Politico, and you can ask questions via Slido, the app that you know by now probably, sli.do. Using the hashtag #AfterMerkel, so we will see them here and check in with your questions. If you're following from the event website, Slido will be embedded automatically below the live stream window. If you're following us on other platforms, just use the app on your computer or phone, please. And again, use the hashtag #AfterMerkel. One last thing, you can already share your thoughts and answer one question that we have to you, and we would like to come back to that during the discussion and at the end, of course. The question is, what will be for you the top priorities of the new German coalition government? That is something that you can share with us, and we'll have a word cloud here, and it will show what is on the top of your minds on that. But without further ado, I would like to turn to my guest, Manfred Weber, as I said, the chairman of the EPP group in the European Parliament and the deputy chairman of the CSU party, which is important and an important differentiation these days. Mr. Weber, thank you for joining me here in Brussels. We learned a very short time ago that both party leaders of the CDU and the CSU in Germany formally invited the leaders of the Free Democrats and the Greens to start exploratory talks to form a governing coalition. Is that a good idea to do that when CDU and CSU together lost quite considerably in the elections and come only second?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation. And yes, it is a good idea, because in Germany we don't have a constitutional obligation that the number one has a right to form a government first. That is not the case in German constitutional situation. That means the parties have got a mandate from the citizens, and now they have to sit together and check who gets the best opportunity to form really a bridge-building aspect, a bridge-building approach to form a government, to bring things together. And that's based on content. I like this very much. It's not based on, first of all, on whether you have 1,000 votes more or less. It is based on content. And that will start now. Hopefully it will not take so much time like last time. We had a government in March after the German elections last time. This time I hope we can speed up, and our idea is to have a government until Christmas this year. And we as CDU-CSU, we lost significantly, no doubt about this. But we have a chance to govern together with others, and that is what we try to do.
Is there, how do you envision these talks to actually happen and to be conducted? Will there be parallel talks of these two parties with the SPD and with your camp, or how can we imagine that to be?
Well, that's quite it's quite also a new challenge for us because, the first time we need now 3 parties, so with CDU-CSU even 4 parties to form a government. That is challenging for Germany. That is the first time. We have also the first time a situation that none of the parties is absolutely so strong, so obviously so strong that they can have the lead. So that's why there will be in the next upcoming days and weeks a lot of informal, direct talks. You mentioned already that my party offered now talks to Greens and Liberals. The Greens already said they will have talks on the weekend with the Socialists. So everybody talk with everyone, and then we will set and define whether a common understanding about the major political decisions is possible or not. Again, I think we have a good offer because EPP is, as a People's Party, ready for the bridge building aspect. So we want to include the different ideas on the table. When you listen, for example, to the Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg, so Kretschmann, he said publicly that having the pragmatic approach of EPP, of center-right in mind when it is about climate change, then we can make things real. We can implement things. We can do things in Germany, even on this climate issue, which is for the Greens such an important bond. Our offer is on the table, so I would say let's start with the talks.
Is the offer on the table already?
Well, again, the letter is already on the table, and we have also good signals from all parties that they are ready to talk. What is probably for the European perspective extremely important is that democracy works in Germany. We have a high participation. The turnout was quite good, similar like last time. So people are interested in what is going on in the political scenery. And what is also extremely important, the extremes lost. So AfD is weakened, the right extreme party, and the Linke, though the left party, is also weakened. They are under 5%. So that is, I think, a very promising message to the rest of Europe that probably also Corona, all the developments, people see that a reasonable government in the center of the landscape is better in crisis times than any kind of radical approach. And that is a positive signal. So Germany is stable, democracy works, and from all parties in the center, a clear pro-European message.
I'll come to that and the European message in just a minute. Just because you mentioned it, the CSU, your own party, the smaller one of the 2 EPP parties in Germany, would actually be the 4th party in such a coalition government. What does that say for the ambition and for the commitment of your party to such a possible coalition?
Well, we are part of the team. We campaign together. We want to achieve now a good result for our country together. And for CSU, we are always quite unique party. We are not only probably a small party by number, but we have always our Bavarian background in mind, so the regional background in mind. And I think we can say today that the CSU has no problem to show their opinion and to show their voice with Markus Söder in the lead. So we are playing a quite prominent role, I would say, in all these talks. So we know our role. We are part of the bigger team of the EPP in Germany, CDU-CSU, but we always underline the special interests from our party.
If that coalition will happen, should this coalition be happening eventually, will Armin Laschet be the Chancellor?
Absolutely.
And that is 100% clear?
That is 100% clear. He was our candidate, and we are now negotiating together with him. All the discussions afterwards are in a way, understandably difficult. We lost 8%. That is a big defeat. And we should mention this. We should show this to the citizens that we understood that we lost significantly. Having in mind that after 16 years of Angela Merkel, it was a good period of time for Germany, and I would also say for Europe. But it is also clear that this felt a little bit to be exhausted after 16 years of governing a country. And that's why there is now this cut, and we were aware that without Angela Merkel, and please have in mind the first time in history of Germany, we had a campaign without an acting president, without an acting chancellor, running again to be re-elected. Having this in mind, I think we were aware about the challenges, about the problems. Now we have the situation. Socialists are ahead, but we are in a way on the same level. And now we have the chance to form different forms of government. Let's test it now. Let's try it now.
Looking at at the process that you just described, it looks like your parties underestimated the importance of Angela Merkel as the cohesive figure for the party. Did voters in the end just not care about the party as much as parties actually do? By voting for a quarter of the electorate voted for Olaf Scholz, for example, who ran on the same promise.
Well, let's be frank. We underestimated that Olaf Scholz presented himself as a personality, as a kind of a normal successor, as a neutral successor for Angela Merkel. As vice chancellor, you can count on me. He had a quite boring style of presenting himself. I don't want to be negative to him, but this was a perception, I think. And we underestimated that people don't saw it. Probably we were not capable enough as CDU to show what is behind Olaf Scholz, what is the true content on the socialist program, when it's about taxation, when it's about Eurobonds, about other things which we oppose, which we are against. There we probably were not capable enough to talk about content. It was mainly, the campaign in Germany was mainly a debate about personalities, about the Chancellor, yes, and not so much about the content. And that was probably a disadvantage of this campaign. That has also a lot to do with the quite positive situation in Germany. Nobody has a real fear about jobs. We have a very good economic situation in Germany. Germany is and was in good hands. That is a general feeling. That's why we couldn't manage to really present content as a point to differentiate between the parties. And what I also want to underline is that it was not possible, especially with the lack of Europe in the campaign debate, that we couldn't manage to talk about the real future questions, what is ahead of us. And this paid also positive for Olaf Scholz, that the socialists could manage this personalization of the campaign and not so much about content.
Was it a mistake to, for a few months ago, for your party, at the campaign of your parties, the Greens were the main opponent. Was that a mistake, or again something that people underestimated, that Olaf Scholz will raise from the ashes of the polls at least?
Well, everybody discussed about the Green Wave 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. Everybody discussed about the Baerbock could become Chancellor of Germany. So it was not only, let me say, our assessment, it was a general assessment. The polls gave us this idea. One reflection for me out of this experience of this campaign is that we should in the future not so much care about what experts tell us, what the public opinion tells us, what the polls tell us. We should be much more focusing on what we believe in and fight for this and present this. And there was a lack of future debate. We discussed too much the current situation with COVID and the current daily life, and too less future orientation. Where will Germany be in 10 years' time, for example? This kind of discussion was not there. And this was obviously not an advantage for us.
You said the content was not figuring very prominently in the campaign, and different ideas about European policy and politics actually were not. Could it be that there is just not that parties have very similar positions on these things, that they don't bring up because it's hard to differentiate one party from another one if there is just not a big difference in the positions? Was that the case in EU affairs?
Well, the positive thing is for sure all center parties in Germany are pro-European parties. We stick to our principle that Germany must be rooted in a deep European network and connected with all friends on European level. That is a very important positive message. So we have no debate at all in Germany about leaving or something like this European Union. We know that our destiny, our future is Europe, and that's very positive. On the other hand, you described it correctly, that there was no debate about what are the next steps. And this is also a concern, a point of concern for me, because if we will get a left government with Olaf Scholz in the lead, I tell you, I think we can already, in a way, forget about one of the main challenges for the next 10 years, and that is defense in Europe. Ursula von der Leyen presented in the State of the Union speech the initiative to have, together with Emmanuel Macron during the French presidency, the conference to do a big step in the common defense pillar. And I tell you, the socialists in Germany were not capable to even give the okay for drones for the Bundeswehr, for the German army. So the left is not capable to take over the responsibility needed in today's world. When we are alone, the Americans are not anymore there, and we are surrounded by challenges on security issues. So that's why in these aspects, where are the next steps for Europe? I don't see a socialist managed government capable to really deliver on these things. And another consideration for the European level is that the EPP approach from Angela Merkel was probably sometimes critically discussed. It was sometimes criticized on this bridge-building aspect when it was about Viktor Orban, about Babiš, about Kaczynski and so on. But I think a left-wing government with a more, if I may say, an ideologically driven approach on some of the issues could be a risk for even deepening the splits inside of European Union. And again, our Christian democratic EPP approach, sometimes a boring approach on listening and being aware and contributing and trying to build up the network necessary for stability for Europe, this is needed more than ever before. I am afraid about some deepening of splits between East-West in the European Union. And these are two arguments where I would say that this was not so much in the debate, in the German debate, about what impact does this have for the European level, and we have to focus this now.
Do you think people would have been interested in these questions?
I'm sure. My experience is, if you allow me to add another element about China. We didn't spoke about China. Sorry, we are economically as Germans so depending already on China, BMW, Siemens, on all the companies, Volkswagen, and we didn't spoke about the development. That on global level, we all understand that this is the hot potato. That is the top issue in the political debate. Whether we sell a few cars more, or whether we stand up for our European way of life, for democracy, for rule of law, and all the other aspects. That is the key question, together with Joe Biden, which we have to answer in the next upcoming years. And this has so much to do with workers in Germany, with jobs in Germany and in Europe. And that's why I would really say that is one of the key elements where only CDU, so in historic moments, showed the readiness to make the key decisions with the reunification of Germany, with Helmut Kohl, with Adenauer, about going to the West, about NATO, about creating the Bundeswehr. These are decisions for Germany. And today we are again in such a historic moment of time where we have to do such decisions, and we were not capable, frankly speaking, to put these real big questions on the table, that people have an orientation in which direction our country will go.
Now, Angela Merkel is not known as the fiercest critic of China, for example. Do you think that it really needs a Chancellor Armin Laschet to be more hawkish against China, or is that not something that any green, let me put it like that, foreign minister would ensure anyways?
You know, I myself, I'm very, very tough on this. I think we have to stand up as Europeans. We have to use the TTC talks now with American friends to form a coalition against China, I have to say, to be together as the Western world, to protect our key industries, digital, manufacturing and all these things. That is what we have to do. But I don't want to say that Armin Laschet must immediately copy this or take this as an initiative. I only ask, we have to talk about these global things, because they will fundamentally have an impact on the daily life of citizens in Germany and in Europe as a whole. And that's why we have to talk about this. This makes politics in a way big again. You know, it's not about the day-by-day issues, about the COVID measures, whether I have to wear a mask or not, and so on and so forth. That is important, no doubt about this, but there are extremely big questions ahead of us. And that's normally the job of CDU-CSU, to talk about these issues. And we try to do it. I mean, Laschet also tried to do it, but in the campaign it was, sorry to say, not the main content.
I suggest we take a quick look at questions that people have, and then come back to our discussion. I saw one that I can't find anymore. Do you think Germany needs to do more to renounce clubby corporatism, as somebody asks here, in favor of more dynamic pro-consumer markets for telecoms and insurance, talking about, policy things, actually?
Well, a very detailed question, but I would say, generally speaking, we have to speed up, and there I ask also the next German government to help to use the job engine of the single market in a better way. And there, these modern technologies are key. I think we have not yet finalized the single market in a lot of areas in the European Union, and that is what we have to do.
There's one question that we already answered, so I'll take another one from Charles Azzopardi. What is your opinion about the effect of overall stability and security which follows after the election in Germany? I think that refers to a somehow widespread feeling or fear or concern that this will, what we have in front of us, will lead to a period of instability or, Is that something that people should fear?
I don't think so. I think everybody should give now Germany the necessary time. So we had elections and we need a period of time to come together to consider what are the main priorities for the next government. That is a normal procedure. That is not a phase of instability. Angela Merkel is still in office, so nobody should be concerned about this. And hopefully before Christmas we will have a new government in Germany. And I think this would be good if we can achieve this, because I hope that we can use the French presidency together for reboosting some of the most important issues for Europe. Emmanuel Macron is keen, is ready to contribute in the French presidency, and together with a new established government in Germany, this can be really a good momentum for the European Union. I have in mind the Future of Europe conference, where we talk also about structural things, about democracy in Europe, about the lead candidate, the transnational list, all these points on the table. And there, I hope we can use the momentum of the German new elected government together with the French presidency to boost and to give Europe a good direction.
Do you think Emmanuel Macron will agree to the lead candidate principle?
So I have my special memories about this. He is in favor of a more democratic Europe, and that's why I think it's now the moment to sit together in the format of the Future of Europe conference to identify this, to sort this out, and to come to a common understanding. Europe needs this. That's obvious. We have to show to citizens that they decide about the future of Europe and not only some backdoor deals in Brussels.
It could still, you're very optimistic and upbeat about the chances of a Jamaica coalition, as we call them. What if that doesn't come together? Is that then yet another blow to the CDU and CSU that finds itself in opposition after 16 years? What would that make for? What would that mean for the internal, for the life of and the soul of these parties?
Well, we had the honor to govern Germany much more longer than the socialists did in the German history. So the experience to be defeated and go to opposition after a long period of time of governing is not a new one. We had the same with Helmut Kohl when Gerhard Schröder became Chancellor. But on the other way, also the experience was that when socialists were in office, things went bad, and then we had the chance to come back. And I am sure that the substance, the content, the ideas, the value base of my party, of my movement is strong enough. So we have 11 million voters in Germany. We have a strong local base in the local communities in Germany. And that's why my party will recover. We will have new personalities in office. We will have new ideas. We will present the new ideas for the future. So we will recover, no doubt about this. The question is only, is there a need of suffering in Germany before the CDU-CSU would come back? Let me say it this way. I know it's a very party political perspective, but
you're of course allowed to take the party political perspective to say that your government would be much better. Is is your view that we call it Volkspartei in German and in Germany, those big tents where everybody finds a place and can keep together, is that actually over with that election where you had, the two former big parties in Germany come down to about 25% each, and we saw the rise, at least in the polls for a while, of a third party of the Greens to levels, we talked about that before, that are, that we had at some point three parties that are about the same size. Is that a structural change more than just an incident? Well,
what we see all over Europe in all democracies is that things are getting much more volatile, so that people decide from case by case, so election by election, whom they vote for. You have not anymore, we call it in Germany, Stammwähler, those who are always voting for the same party. That is past. That is not anymore existing. But when you discuss about Volkspartei, a People's Party, then we have to talk about the definition. It's not only about the size. Volkspartei should be big, but it's mainly about whether you have from all parts of a society people inside of your movement. That is what defines a People's Party from our point of view, and that is the case. We have workers there, a lot of voters from the traditional working sector, from trade unions even, are voting for CDC. So we have their entrepreneurs, we have their students. That is the idea of a People's Party, and that is the case. Compared with the Liberals and Greens, they are in a lot of these fields quite clientelistic. So they have a core, let me say, electoral base, and not so much reach out to other parts of the society. So that's why, having this definition in mind, I would say we have still a good chance to continue as a People's Party in the German debate. But it depends a lot on our program, on our profile, on our lead candidates for the future. I would say the starting conditions are good. We can always be proud about the 16 years of Angela Merkel. Germany was in good hands. We can be proud about the heritage of this period of time. And this will also be for the future convincing, I'm sure.
In the European People's Party, on European level, Angela Merkel's role was, talking about her, was actually very clear. Is there somebody who can take over that informal position of undisputed leadership?
After 16 years of Angela Merkel, it's clear that a lot of things will change on European level. Though this dominant and very respected role of Angela Merkel, that she is listening, she's taking care about all arguments, but finally was capable always to present a compromise where everybody finally can support. This is not anymore the case. So I think if Armin Laschet will make it, then the German Chancellor, by definition in a way, because the country is in the center, is a big country, is economically strong, will always have a major role to play. If this is not the case, if he will not come as Chancellor, then even the CDU leader will play a crucial role, but I'm sure with other elements. So, and what I'm happy about is that in the EPP team we have a lot of good and forward-looking and innovative leaders, with Pablo Casado, for example, having his Congress this week in Valencia. We have Kyriakos Mitsotakis, Sebastian Kurz. In the Baltic, we have Christianis Ingrida, other friends, Leo Varadkar in Ireland. So there is a team of well-prepared, already elected and supported leaders in the EPP team. I hope I didn't forget someone. So, but I think they are there, and our idea is now to bring them together and to define really on European level an EPP branding, what it means to be center-right. Today it's too much fragmented from a national point of view, and the ambitions for us until 2024 and in the next European election is really to bring an European party element on European level together with these leaders. And as a group leader, I might say also with taking the knowledge of the colleagues here in the European Parliament in mind, this together.
When you said you hope you didn't forget anybody, that also means that you aren't as many as in the past anymore. And just imagine for a moment, I know it's hard for you, but other people can imagine, in Germany without an EPP party in the government. Would that actually weaken the EPP's influence in Europe quite considerably?
No, I don't see a direct impact because you see the structure in the European Parliament will not change. Ursula von der Leyen as EPP Commission President is in office, so I don't expect any major change. It is more about the Council, probably, that there will be changes, that's obvious, but that's normal. If you have a governmental change on national level, you have an impact on the Council side. That's traditionally, in a way, normal. And yes, I forgot Klaus Johannes in Romania, so don't forget about him. So we still have a very good colleagues there, and for example, Pablo has a good chance to win the next competition in the next elections in Spain. So there is up and downs. That's normal in democracy. The key question is, do we have a proper idea about what is the DNA, what is the branding, what are the key projects for us as EPP to convince people to vote for us? And that is what we work on.
Is that the promise that you said you will run for being the EPP party president at the next Congress? Is that the center of your bid to become boss of that party?
I tried this already in Helsinki with my nomination as lead candidate for the EPP. This project, like we promised the Europeans that Europe can beat cancer, for example, which is an understandable for every citizen in Europe, for every individual in Europe. It's an understandable project, and this kind of project is needed on European level. We are too much technocrats. We are too much detailed politicians who are working on the details, and we have to come forward with very easy, understandable projects for the citizens of Europe. And this kind of party politicization of Europe, in a positive sense, to offer alternatives on European level, is exactly what Europe needs now, to go the next step towards a democratic Europe. And you know, I'm fascinated by the project. That is my place where I want to work, and the rest is then in the hand of the next party congress in April in Vienna.
I would like to come back for our very last question, because we have to wrap up, to Berlin, because we're handing over to Berlin after this. Should it actually be the case that Olaf Scholz becomes Chancellor, what do you think is the role of Armin Laschet?
Well, I cannot speculate about this. We have to see what will happen now in the next upcoming days on the negotiations. We can offer a lot from an EPP point of view. I think the way from the liberals to vote for the socialists is the steps you have to make are more and bigger than the Greens towards the center. That is what I feel, what I sense. And that's why I think let's give now the democratic talks a chance. Let's listen to them, and then let's try to form a government. Stability is guaranteed in all circumstances, and Europe will have a Germany which is on the side of a pro-European development. Are
you personally involved in these talks?
Yes, I have contact with them. I'm not in Berlin directly talking. That's the job of the Berlin elected colleagues there, those who are responsible for this. But on party level, there are a lot of discussions going on.
Manfred Weber, I thank you very much for joining us today for this interview and for this event after Merkel. It's actually a pleasure to have you here in person, and that we can talk again here on sitting at the same table. So thanks very much for joining us, and feel free to stay on. Or, of course, I know, and you all know that there's a lot on your plate. Feel free to leave us here, and then I will hand over to my colleagues here for the next steps in this discussion. So thanks very much again.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. And with this, I would like to hand over to my colleague Cornelius Hirsch, who is also sitting here in the studio in the European Parliament, who is our polling guru, as we like to call Cornelius, actually, and has a few political insights here just before the panel starts, to set the scene even a little better. So over to you, Cornelius.
Thank you very much, Florian. I'm happy to give for the next 5 minutes now a brief data insight. And you know, the last time I gave a data insight after an election was at our event after the US election. And I had to try to explain why the polls in the US were so off once again. So I'm really happy that this time the polling firms in Germany did such a fantastic job and got really close to the actual result in the end, with just 1 percentage point between the final polls ahead of the election and the final election results. Why am I mentioning this? That the German pollsters have quite a good track record, because I want to cite another poll right now. The election results were very, very close, with the Social Democrats in the end only 1.6 percentage points ahead of the Christian Democrats. So both the SPD, the Social Democrats, and their candidate for Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Armin Laschet from the CDU on election night claims to have a mandate to form a government. But when it comes to the German public sentiment, then there's quite a clear preference on this question. More than 60% of the German public in some polls, even 2/3 of German voters, want Olaf Scholz to be the next chancellor. And what about coalition preference? A majority of respondents in this survey by Infratest DIMAP for the public broadcaster ARD said after the election results were known that they would prefer a so-called traffic light coalition with the SPD, red, the liberal FDP, yellow, and the Greens. That means significantly more support for this coalition option than for the other option, a Christian Democratic-led coalition as well, together with the FDP and the Greens. If we pull up the first slide now, then we see on this slide the seat results overall on top, and then the different coalition formations below. The just mentioned traffic light coalition and its parties have won together 416 seats in Sunday's election, as you can see in the second row of the lower chart on the slide. So we know now that Germans overall have quite a preference towards an SPD-led government. But what about the voters of the two smaller future coalition partners, or potential future coalition partners? This could prove trickier, especially in the coalition talks as well, because the voters of the Green Party, they are clearly on board and they favor teaming up with the Social Democrats, with 81% of Green voters in favor of a traffic light coalition. On the other hand, the FDP, the liberal base, is more split, with 51% actually preferring a coalition with the CDU-CSU and only 41% in favor of a traffic light coalition. And as things stand, and with the signals we hear from several sides of the Christian Democratic Union, the Christian Democrats themselves are not even that sure if they have the mandate to form a government coalition after all under Armin Laschet. But we see now that the public mood overall points quite clearly into the other direction as well. And as we mentioned, the CDU and CSU were faced with quite a dramatic loss across the board. And among the many reasons behind this, one of them being also the success of Olaf Scholz to portraying himself as the choice of continuity and being seen as more trustworthy in polls. Behind this are also more pure demographic mathematic forces. And this can also be seen on the second slide that I have prepared. You win or lose elections in Germany, like in many Western countries, via the older generations. They are more in numbers, and they also show out more frequently on election day, so they show higher turnout rates. 38% of voters in Germany are actually 60 years or older, and we can see on this chart that the SPD outperformed the CDU-CSU in these key demographic groups. The SPD was the strongest party among the voters between the age of 35 and 69, actually. And the CDU was only still the strongest party in the oldest age group of those 70 years and older. The Greens and Liberals, on the other side, they did significantly better among the younger voters. But let's turn with that also to the last slide, because the other demographic component that I want to mention also in this data analysis is the gender gap. So it's the difference between a party support among women and among men. And under the leadership of Angela Merkel, we saw that the Christian Democrats continuously improved their support among female voters. And they received higher results among women than among men. And in the previous election, actually in 2017, the CDU had a 6.3 higher result among women than among men. And this advantage is completely gone now without Merkel as the candidate for Chancellor, it seems, as we can see also in this chart showing all the gender gap results for the CDU since 2002 until 2021. But it is important to also mention that there are more female voters in Germany overall, and especially also in this older cohort, the demographics that we analyzed a bit before. And if a party really wants to secure first place, then it cannot allow or it cannot afford to alienate this voter group. And this was already the last slide from my side. We saw now the indicators how the CDU, or some indication for how the CDU lost first place in this election. And we also know that the coalition option that the Germans would prefer, or the German public would prefer according to polls, and also who they would prefer as Chancellor according to those polls from this week. So now I'm very curious to also see and to hear what our panelists make of this election results and what happens next, also policy-wise in Germany and for what it means for the European Union. And with that, and with this data insight, I give back to you, Florian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cornelius, for this food for thought and for, as you say, insights on how this result came actually together with an interview with Manfred Weber before, who was remarkably upbeat for the chances of a Jamaica coalition and remarkably, should we say, bold when it comes to the Social Democrats and their program and personality. So I'm very curious to hear from our panelists in Berlin, and I, without further ado, will hand over to you, Matthew. And I'm very curious what you and your guests on your panel make of this situation.
Well, thank you very much, Florian, and thank you, Cornelius. And thank you, of course, to Manfred Weber. After what has been a really long week for all of us, I certainly could use whatever he's been putting in his Kool-Aid over there in Brussels. very optimistic view of the CSU's chances here for a Jamaica coalition. But before we get to that question with the panelists, I'd like to introduce the panel. We've got an all-star panel. It's a panel of winners, if you will, and I'll go on a limb here myself and say you're looking at members of what is likely to be the next coalition in Germany. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order, starting with Metin Hakverdi, who's an SPD member of the Bundestag on the Committee for European Affairs. We also have with us Sergej Lagodinsky, an MEP from the Greens. And we have Michael Link, who represents the Free Democrats. He's a former deputy foreign minister from Germany, of course, and is also on the Bundestag's Committee for European Affairs. And to round out the panel, which would otherwise be a manel, we have my very good friend Jana Purliarin, who is from the European Council on Foreign Relations. We were supposed to have somebody from the CDU. They unfortunately decided to pull out at the last minute. They are licking their wounds, which I guess is not a message that has reached Brussels or Manfred Weber. But let's jump into the discussion. And we have a lot of questions already. And one of the questions that keeps coming up, and I would like to put this to you, Michael Link, is why this question of Europe, which we always hear from German politicians, is so important. All of the rhetoric, about Germany's future rests in Europe. Germany's destiny is in Europe. It was in the preamble of the current coalition agreement between the CDU and the SPD, of course. It didn't really come up at all in this campaign. Also not from your party, quite frankly. Why do you think that is?
Well, thank you, Matthew, first of all, for having me here on this panel. Well, I think we tried in our electoral platform. It was adopted to 1 week ahead of the elections. And also in the program, we elaborate a lot on Europe. And we tried as much as we could, our Secretary General in the panels, in the TV panels also to mention it, but we have not been part of some key TV debates. And we tried, at least at the local level in the constituencies, really to speak about Europe, because this election day was national election, yes, but at the same time is also a little election day for the European Union. It matters what happens in the German government when it comes, and in the Bundestag when it comes to key European decisions. So maybe we did not speak it out loudly enough, but we had it, and we had it in our platform. We mentioned it, and now even more so, it will play a key role in the negotiations for the new coalition. Europe matters, and all the EU issues will be a key part of these negotiations.
Metin, I'd like to come to you with a similar question. Although I should note that you have something of a crystal ball, because I remember sitting together with you a couple of years ago in Arizona, of all places, throwing back margaritas on a very strenuous work trip that we were on out there. And at the time, the SPD, I think, was below 15%, and you boldly predicted that Olaf Scholz, who's a hamburger like you, would be the next chancellor. And at the time, I was sure it was the tequila talking. What changed, do you think, for the SPD in this election over the past couple of months?
Well, thanks, Matt, to have me on the show. Good to see you in Berlin. I was in Berlin this afternoon, but I returned home now from Hamburg. Well, of course, I know him better than anybody else because I'm from Hamburg, and we Hamburgers are all on the same trip on that one. Seriously, I think there are two issues to it. One is the situation of German conservatism generally after Mrs. Merkel. I think everybody has been talking about this in the last months, but this will be an issue for the next months, if not years to come. What's the situation in the center right is politically after she left now, or she will be leaving. And the other aspect is, of course, us, the Social Democrats, because if you look at it, which I didn't know when we had our drinks back then in Arizona, which I was just hoping for, is that once in a lifetime, the Social Democrats managed not to have only a strong candidate, but also to manage to have a very, very serious campaign, everybody on board. You remember that Olaf Scholz was not able to win the party election on the chair of the party, but even with the other two and others, we were just really, really strong and sticking together as a team over a very long period of time. And obviously that was one key element, even with a close finishing, to finish first.
Coming back to the Europe question, why didn't you talk more about Europe? Is it because your previous candidate, Martin Schulz, talked a lot about Europe and obviously crashed and burned on election day?
Well, actually, I think your observation is not 100% correct. We talked a lot about Europe.
Wouldn't be the first time. Wouldn't be the first time.
But obviously only in the context of having a left-green social democratic coalition as an option. And what would that mean for the European integration and the position of Germany in such a coalition? But as the results turn out now, this is not an option anymore. But we did actually talk a lot about our goals within the European Union, but only in this context. I agree on that one. So we all know, most people know what Olaf Scholz is about. As a Secretary of Finance, he managed to take big steps into the integration of the financial markets and further integration of the European Union. So Germany is still a very pro-European country and will continue to be so.
Sergey, I think we all know that your party, the SPD, the FDP, they're all pro-European parties. But I think what people outside of Germany really want to know is, well, what does that mean for Europe in the coming years? What do you think it means? What kind of changes do you realistically think we can see at the European level, or impulses coming out of Germany in the coming years after this election, assuming that we are heading towards the traffic light coalition?
I think that what we missed during this campaign is not just Europe, it's the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that we are facing a very important years and upcoming years on three issues: on the climate issue, on the foreign policy issue and the ability to act as a foreign policy actor, and on democracy and rule of law issue. And all these three topics will be decided within the European Union, through the European Union, and through the member states that define their priorities and their preferences through common European interests. And that is what could be really different in the combination that we're talking about here. Probably also in a combination of a Jamaica, which is still not something that is out of question. We're still in the first week of exploring options, and I wouldn't put this option aside. It's too early for that. But the presence of the Greens especially, but also of Liberal Democrats, would bring in either combination parties that define the national preferences of the national government through the lens of European preferences. So things like Nord Stream 2 or some other things like climate change would not be possible just by focusing on what the German interests dictate us to do, but we should talk about European solidarity and look broader at the broader picture. And I think this is something that the both parties, if they do it right, can bring into this new combination.
But Jana, do you think that will actually happen? Because there have been a lot of false starts, I would say, on this front in the past. Certainly, if you look over the past 4 years, you've also had a coalition that is on paper quite pro-European. we did see the recovery fund and the mutualization of debt as part of that, which a lot of people see as crossing a pretty significant Rubicon for Europe. And yet on other fronts, we didn't really see the kind of reforms that a lot of people were hoping for when Martin Schulz was still around. What do you think a traffic light coalition in particular? I realize that the Jamaica, as it's called, is still an option, but just for the this hypothetical case, what do you think a traffic light would mean for Europe?
I come to that in a second, but I want to have a two-finger on the role of EU policy in the election, because I think it didn't play a huge role, and that was very much on purpose, because I think that that politicians, they don't admit it here, but that they think that this doesn't make you win elections. This doesn't bring voters to go to the polls. This is not decisive. And you see that in Germany, that being a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, of the European Committee, is not seen as something that enhances your career significantly. So I think there is a problem here also because, it didn't play any role in the TV debates that we had. There were no questions, but none of the candidates brought it up prominently. And I think that is really a problem. But coming back to your question, looking at the traffic light coalition. So I think the biggest problem will be how to basically finance things. So the FDP has been pretty clear that they don't want the EU to raise their own taxes, whereas this is a plan of the SPD and the Green Party, that there should be this possibility. Then another, I think, very urgent question early on will be the future of the Stability and Growth Pact. Basically, the FDP wants to turn off the tap again and wants to go back to where we've been previously, go back to stricter conditionality, to sanctions, to have a strict limit, an upper ceiling when it comes to deficits, when it comes to debt levels. And they consider the EU Recovery Fund, Next Generation EU, as basically a historical exception, a one-off, whereas the Greens want to use this mechanism, this instrument, also in the future. And I think so this will be one of the most interesting things to watch, how this is solved on the European level and what kind of compromise will be found, because I think that all three parties in a traffic light coalition would be really committed to deeper EU integration. But the question is who finances it and how, and what role the state should play in all this.
Michael Link, I'd like for you to respond to that, since your party was directly mentioned there. And there is a lot of concern in Europe. We hear this all the time. Over the past couple of days, there's been a lot of sort of shrill comments, I would say, out of France about the FDP and the leader of your party, Christian Lindner, and what you would mean for the European project. Do you see your party acting effectively as a brake here towards further integration on these key issues of fiscal measures?
Well, not at all, because this is not a new thing that we have policy disagreements on the way how we finance our public finances, our fiscal rules. That is nothing new. And that played a role, in fact, in this German election campaign when it came, for example, to the national debt brake. We clearly stick to these rules. We don't think we do the European integration a favor if we center European integration around debt and around common issuance of bonds. No, we would rather focus the integration more right now, especially on security and defense, on common foreign policy, on common border protection, on common rules for migration, on common rules for asylum, on strengthening the single market, and on creating a political union. That is, I think, the real thing. Because before we think about all these things we just heard also from Jana, we should first think about really building a political union. And that is the key now. Let's not forget, there's a letter of the eight states clearly opposing loosening the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. And we clearly sympathize with their position. We are not isolated at all. And I think that it would not be wise and good for European integration now to clearly loosen the rules and to center European integration on common issuance of debt. That's not the way forward. The way forward is, especially now, facing the external threats and really trying to get our act together in foreign and security policy.
I want to come to foreign and security policy, but just a quick follow-up on that. Could your party, or would your party, accept a further softening of the Security and Growth Pact, at least on a temporary basis, given everything that's going on in Europe with the pandemic and the sorry state of many countries' financial affairs?
Well, we are not in favor of softening it. And even Mr. Scholz, when he was in Paris, he clearly said that the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact are correct as they are. That was a remarkable quote, and we will certainly remind him about this in the negotiations. No, to the contrary, I think it is important that we go back to the rules because they have worked well in many ways, and therefore we should not forget that it's very important. It's not about austerity. We are not Thatcherite austerity fans, but it's very important to have sound public finances. And again, we are not alone in that. I think there is, if you put it right, a very clear majority of EU member states preferring that way. Go to the Nordics, go to the Baltics, go to the Central Europeans, go to the Dutch. I think that is the way forward.
I want to come to your security comment because it segues well with a question we have from one of our viewers here. This is from Jean-Francois. Hope I pronounced that correctly. The question is, will the next majority coming from the elections here stick to the 2% target? This is the 2% of GDP that all NATO members have pledged to work towards after the election. I'm going to put that question to you, Metin. Are you going to stick to the 2%, or are you going to leave your NATO allies in the lurch?
Before I answer that tough question, let me have a comment on the other tough question we had before, because it's super important. If Jana is right, and being a member of the European Commission is not a career milestone, I'm also a member of the Budget Committee, so that is traditionally the last step.
Your career's over. Your career's over.
So on this point, I just the election had happened. Okay, so let's not continue campaigning between the parties, especially while we are assuming that I assume will end up in a coalition. I remember when we had the decision in the German Bundestag on the recovery fund, that we had a very large 2/3 majority on the decision on the Bundestag we made on that one. And the reason for that is not that our liberal friends, because my friend Michael Link was also part of that decision, that they gave up on their positions generally. Of course not. The liberals had also always a differentiated position on the finance issues of the European Union. But it was a result of external effects, in this case, the pandemic. And I expect that we will have sort of a next era of external effects. So I think we don't have to argue on the principal position on how to finance the European Union, how to have a financial integration of the European Union. I think we will, by historic developments, I think we will have to make some progress on these issues, not because the parties give up their original position and their theory, but to have practical results in solving practical problems of the future. Your second question, I assume, this is my assumption, that we will not have a 2% goal in the coalition treaty itself, but we will have a strong commitment to the Bundeswehr and to a collective defense approach towards Europe, and also about capabilities. And I think it will be, if you've listened to Olaf Scholz closely in the last months before the election, I think it's pretty clear that this will be an important issue that we will make a bigger progress in terms of security than we had the term before this term we are in right now, because we didn't manage to reach the 2% goal, but we increased the defense spending a lot. And this, as I say, this is as a member of the budget committee.
So are you turning away from the 2%?
This will continue.
Does that mean you're turning away from the 2% goal?
No, as you know, Matt, you're aware of that politics is not always a question of black and white. No, I assume this will be not mentioned in, not stated as a goal, the 2% goal in the coalition treaty, but not the opposite, of course not.
So it's more of a don't ask, don't tell what you're spending policy.
No,
Sergey.
no. Will be an increase, a significant increase on defense spending.
Sergey, I'd like to come to you on this security question. Your party also has a lot of reservations, or has had historically, about military interventions and spending, a lot of money on the military and so forth. There is, as you know, also a big debate in Brussels and Europe more generally about this question of strategic autonomy, which has been really kind of pushed by the French president, as you know. We have a question from another viewer here. How the next coalition, which your party seems destined to be part of, whatever happens, will shape this question of strategic autonomy. Could you talk about that a little bit, how you as the Greens see that question going forward?
I think, the Greens are a pacifist party and have pacifist roots, but the Greens also are not blind to the situation in the world, and the situation is very complex. And in this situation, as Europeans, we must admit and must see that it is important that Europeans position themselves as a foreign policy actor that is self-reliant and not always relies on someone, wherever this someone is, in Washington or elsewhere, to protect itself and to be able to act. And the strategic autonomy question should not be limited to security. It's also a matter of resilience. For example, it's a matter of how we want to be able to react to hybrid way of attacking European Union, European countries. You have to look at the border with Poland and with Lithuania, with all due criticism that we might have regarding the reaction of those countries. It is important to understand what the root cause of the crisis is, and the root cause of the crisis is the hybrid attack and intervention by Lukashenko. So we will need answers and capabilities to respond to those new challenges. And those new challenges are not just military in essence. It's also about, for example, reducing strategic dependency on resources, but also on markets, being more self-assertive vis-a-vis China, or being more independent in terms of energy from Russia. This is what we and I personally understand as part of strategic autonomy, and not the question of 2%, which is frankly a foreign policy fetish that I don't share. I think that we should be more active regarding our military and military capabilities. But this can be done also through synergies. On the one hand, looking that we, for example, look for ways how to bundle our capacities in the European Union from different armies with different capabilities and different abilities to complement each other on the one hand. And on the other hand, look at strategic needs instead of numbers that make us a little bit blind for geostrategic or strategic thinking. So that is what I understand what strategic autonomy should be.
Okay, I want to come to Jana on that. I think that she wanted to respond. Jana, just quickly, a lot of people would say, we've all heard these arguments, but a lot of people would say, well, a deal is a deal. Germany agreed to this, and Germans are supposed to stick to the agreements they make. What do you think
No,
about this?
I totally agree. But I think under a traffic light coalition, we will not see a 2% commitment, even if I personally think it's wrong. But I see some more important obstacles, actually, because I mean, it's true that security and defense is not only about hard security and capabilities, but just looking at the AUKUS deal, it was very much about capabilities and submarines. So I think that we tend to ignore this side of the coin very often. And we have a tremendous lack of capabilities, and we need to build them, and that takes money. But that also, if we want to do it jointly, there are some other problems. There is, for example, in the traffic light coalition, we will see a problem when it comes to arms exports, because both the Greens and the SPD want to tighten the rules to make it more difficult to export to complicated partners, and also when it comes to joint armament projects. I think this will be then a very important aspect: how to strike a deal with the French or the Spaniards, how to agree on joint rules here. Same with the European Defence Fund. And if I was kind of pointing at the FDP in the previous round, this round is on the Greens, because the European Defence Fund, as it is, was not very loved by the Greens. They criticized it quite massively because it gives money to the arms industry without kind of enough conditionality, as the Greens have said. And same with the European Peace Facility, the new instrument that allows the EU not only to train kind of partners, but also to equip them, also seen highly critical by the Greens. So I think that it is nice to think of security and defense as another project if kind of the fiscal union, social union, all this doesn't work. But in security and defense, it's not at all easy, because within this coalition, there are some very big differences how to look at this.
Michael Link, doesn't Jana have a point there? Because if you look at the history of this, not just the recent history, but going back years, all of these initiatives move, just leaving the 2% aside for a moment, but all of these initiatives move at a glacial pace. There's a lot of disagreement within Europe, within the European Union, about what to do on the strategic front, even within countries. If we take Germany, for example, I think it took 3 years to agree to send a frigate into the South China Sea. This is one of the questions we have from our viewer Tan Tu, who asks, what about the Indo-Pacific after Merkel? Will there be any changes in foreign policy towards the region there? There really hasn't been any foreign policy, I would argue, towards the region up to now. Isn't it easier just to continue to kind of ride on the coattails of the United States when it comes to security around the world?
Well, certainly that is we really have to get our act together when it comes to defense issues, to foreign policy issues. But that also brings us to difficult questions to our closest European partners, the French. If they define their role only as a member of P5 in the Security Council, then we will never live up to expectations as Europeans on the world stage. So we have some tough debates ahead among Europeans, but first of all, also in this coalition. I think it would be rather unwise not to repeat a clear commitment for 2%, because our allies, our European partners, and the other EU members will, even if the EU would not mention it in the coalition agreement, they would ask us, what do you think about that? And I think it's high time that we really face reality in many ways. There is certainly one super urgent issue, that is addressing climate change, but there is also equally the super urgent issue of really facing the threat we have from China, from Russia, and from others, but especially from these two. And here I hope at least that we can get, for example, with the Green Party, they also have a very clear and sober view on China and on Russia and on the threats from there, that we can together push the coalition partner, whoever it will be it CDU or SPD, also to a more critical approach to both China and Russia. Because that was one of the huge disappointments we criticized as Free Democrats, the role of Merkel, for example, in watering down the language on China, the critical language on China in the last EU-US summit. That is really very important. And also when it comes to the US, I mean, Biden, yes, we can criticize a lot how he handled this and that issue. But in general, he is open to EU, but if only, as I said, we get our act together. So if we don't do that, also in procurement of arms, in military equipment, in training, and in missions, if we are not living up to these expectations, then the US, of course, will certainly not treat us on equal par. And we can speak a lot about autonomy and sovereignty and all these things. We really need not only to talk the talk, but to walk this walk. And therefore, it will be extremely dangerous if we will not be ready for more efforts in military spending, in training our armies and putting together European military capabilities in a way that they can really be practiced, of course, in missions if needed.
Metin, the leader of your parliamentary group, Ralf Mützenich, who's just re-elected, he famously wants to pull all U.S. nuclear weapons out of Germany. Is it really realistic to expect the kind of initiatives that Michael Link is talking about here, or are we just going to, if this coalition comes together, see just the kind of muddling through on these security issues that we've seen for the past several years?
Well, muddling through could be really annoying, but it could also be a fundamental strategy of getting consensus on a long term. But I
it's the European way.
That, excuse me?
It's the European way.
It's not only the European way. As a compromise can be a strength, but it could also be a weakness in situations, of course. I don't want to generally just defend that kind of strategy. And it's, of course, frustrating for those who have strong policy guidelines and policy goals to see that things are not moving fast enough. But especially on this China issue, but also in the global role of Europe and obviously the German role within Europe on this question is, I would connect that to my thoughts on external events. We will be forced to make progress on this. Things are happening. Things are happening between France and the United and Australia on the submarine issue, which leaves us with general questions of our corporations and how we look at the world. But this world, as we look on it, is changing, and this will end up with in the European area as well. Even if it's a muddling through, it will be changing the results of the muddling through. So I'm a big fan of compromises. The new Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, is a big fan of compromises to get forceful majority on important issues. But that doesn't mean that things are not changing. The world is changing, in some ways, unfortunately changing. But we will react on this one, especially on the topic of China.
Let me make a proposal.
And the Chancellor is not in office, will be not in office. And obviously,
can I make a particular
China issue?
Michael Link would like to make a proposal.
If the 2% are too narrow-minded, let's talk about 3% for comprehensive international security. The 3Ds. We have it in our platform. It's not our idea. It's Wolfgang Ischinger's idea from the Munich Security Conference. He says 3D: defense, development, diplomacy. Let's have a broader view on it. That's because that's the real thing. We really need an integrated approach, a comprehensive approach for defense, development, and security. I think that can be the way forward. Not only speaking military, but really accepting that we need to do more on the international stage, including military. And that's, I think, the way we could also convince our European partners that Germany is living up to expectations to assume more responsibility on, also by spending more, but especially by increasing our capacities.
Sergei, you're nodding there. Is that something your party could get on board with?
Look, I think in the upcoming weeks, we will need the creative solutions. And this is, for example, one solution which combines our concerns and the chances and the visions that we all share. So, for example, by the way, crisis prevention and civil crisis prevention is something that is always dear to our heart, just as developmental policies and efforts. So I do think that there is a way forward on many of the issues that we discussed, but we are sitting here not around the negotiation table of a coalition treaty. I think there are many ways of discussing issues. And by the way, on the issue of a nuclear presence in Europe, Greens have very clear proposals also in our election program. For example, we could get an observer status within the treaty parties conference on nuclear ban treaty as a first step, initiate a process of discussion in Europe on the nuclear reduction of nuclear capabilities, but also involve in those discussions our eastern neighbors who are threatened, immediately threatened by their neighbor, Russia. So there are always ways to find a good path where the interests and the visions of all partners are possible.
I do want to come to the Eastern neighbors in a moment, but on this question for you quickly, Sergei, of climate change, which we haven't discussed, which is clearly something that's looming over all of these coalition talks. How much openness to compromise do you think there is within your party on the question of climate goals?
I think this is the area where the compromises will be slimmer from our side, because, of course, this is one of the core issues. And this is something that we deem as our mission in the upcoming government. The upcoming government should be a climate policy government. And I'm not sure how much compromises we can afford, quite frankly, in any combination we're talking about. And by the way, it's not just the Christian Democrats who would be problematic. It could also be a big issue with our social democratic friends and partners. I don't think that the traffic light coalition is per se a more climate oriented coalition. We see this in many Bundesländer where the social democrats are governing, where the coal transformation from coal away from coal industry has been really torpedoed and kind of stopped and was very slow. So we will have a lot to discuss on that front as well.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I did want to address, though, quickly this issue of the area around Germany, the rule of law question involving Poland and Hungary. Metin, just quickly, do you think that we will see a more confrontational approach pushed by Germany on that question when it comes to preserving democracy in the European Union?
Short question, short answer. Yes, because we will have a traffic light coalition, and this coalition on this issue will be different and will be more, I wouldn't say confrontational, but very clear in the standards that we communicated and expected.
Jana, I'd like to give you the last word. We've got about a minute left. What difference do you think this next government, whether it's Jamaica or traffic light, a lot of people would say these are, at the end of the day, shades of gray. But in terms of the European question, what do you think it will mean for Europe? What will Europe look like in 4 years?
So when it comes to a traffic light coalition, I have a lot of hope when it comes to a new approach to China. Germany Europeanizing its China policy more than it had happened previously, and also a more principled approach vis-à-vis Russia and also Turkey. That brings me back to the rule of law issue. I think in the traffic light coalition, all parties, especially actually the Greens and the FDP, would be very much looking for a more principled approach to all three of these countries, but also inside the EU to Poland and Hungary. The negative thing that could happen is, I think, I really, it's beyond me to imagine how you three find a compromise on nuclear sharing, because basically the Greens and the SPD don't want to continue. And I mean, I was hoping that the Conservatives would join a coalition, so both of you could give in to the Conservatives and say, yeah, okay, we need to stay. But if the Conservatives are out, I don't see the FDP really pushing for this. So nuclear sharing and the procurement decision, the replacement of the Tornado, that is something I will closely watch how that is dealt with in the coalition treaty. Overall, I think we will see more continuity than change on many portfolios, I think, because we are structurally status quo country. I think it will be hard to move, but I see some changes in foreign policy.
So in other words, Germany will stay German. Yes, a quick
nuclear sharing is key for NATO, and we need to stick to that.
Okay, nuclear sharing, for those viewers who don't know what nuclear sharing is, it's the commitment Germany has made to carry US nuclear bombs in the case of a nuclear attack with German-owned bombers. Those bombers are now at the end of their lifespan and need to be replaced. And there's a lot of opposition to replacing these jets within both the SPD and the Greens. I want to thank all of our panelists for a really interesting conversation, and thank all of you for tuning in. I'm going to turn things back to Florian Eder in Brussels.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you for and your panelists for this interesting insights and debate on things that are on all of our minds. I would like to wrap this up, and I would like to look at your thoughts, dear viewers, if I can have the word cloud that we prepared. Otherwise, I will start with, here we are. The question is, what will be the top priorities of the next German government? And not very surprisingly, I might say climate change is the biggest word, the most mentioned word. That means among the viewers on this political live event tonight. My takeaways are things that I've learned in the past hour and a little more. Were actually three things, and I'd like that to share with you to wrap things up. One is there are still a lot of very considerable differences between any future possible coalition partners, as we just saw in the lively and interesting debate that Matthew moderated on defense and foreign policy, of course, and other areas also. But what we also saw is that the coalition talks are informally, at least, have already started, and there were many attempts and ways and strategies and creative solutions to try to bridge some of these differences, at least, and to bridge these differences or to brush over them and to muddle through. The second one is that, of my takeaways, is that you could actually see, if you watch this panel discussion, that there is a huge appetite to govern among all the parties that were represented there. And we can actually add in Manfred Weber, my interview guest before, where the mood in his party, in his camp, was a bit of a roller coaster this week, where it started very boldly to say that, of course, they want to govern. Then there's second thoughts over the past days, and today we've heard from him that the CDU and CSU also are still very much in the game, at least they think. But what we've also seen on the panel is that there is already something starting around this other possible or more likely perhaps coalition, the traffic light coalition. And the third thing, because we talked a lot about Europe in all parts of this conversation, and I do think probably One takeaway is that many of you on the panel said that Europe doesn't need to be afraid, but of course Europe will have to adapt to this new government, which will be a very different one either way it goes, because it's not one where one person or one personality like Angela Merkel will dominate all the debate. But it will be a new German government where there are actually new things and new positions or positions that will harden, and that will probably there will probably be some conflicts around those, such as the Stability and Growth Pact, and of course also defense, as we've heard in the past. And then, even if those are resolved, as Jana Puljarin said, there is still and always the question how to finance these things. And with this, I think I would like to wrap it up and thanking all of you for joining us here in the audience. I would like to ask you, if you like the debate, whether you like the debate and the event or not, to give us feedback at write to live@politico.eu, and please check our website for events updates and for future events. That's politico.eu/events. And with that, I wish you all a very wonderful evening.